talk will be from Aaron at TechLinks. He's going to be talking about CryptoMalware.
How's everyone doing this morning? I got asked to speak last minute about CryptoMalware. I guess Mr. Gamblin couldn't make it today, so hence my somewhat humorous but informative slide with the line through letting folks know that there's been a little bit of a change in the schedule even as of this morning. So I hope you guys are all doing well. Did we finally get the talk across the street, the hacking automotive security going over there? Was anybody over there this morning? Okay, good. Was it good? I'm going to have to watch it later because I didn't get a chance to get over there. So, well, hey guys, I want to keep this a little bit interactive this morning. So please, as I'm going through this, if you guys have questions or comments or heckling remarks, as Kevin Thomas tends to have, just go ahead and shout those out, and there might even be something in it for you. So a little bit about myself. I'm the InfoSec team lead at TechLinks, a little company here in town. We do managed services and value-added reseller. I have around 15 years in information security experience. Co-founded the East Tennessee ISSA chapter here in Knoxville to help try to bring the information security community together, increase knowledge sharing, and to help improve the market here in Knoxville for information security professionals, as well as raise security practices here. So at TechLinks, I assess and advise companies of security best practices, and I had in my slides yesterday best in quotation marks because a friend of mine, Slade Griffin, shout out to Slade, says that best is up for discussion. It's really more like common practice, and so the best practice that we all say, best practices. We hear the industry mantra is really debatable, right? What is best for us? So some of what we're here to talk about today is the practices that we see, and so I've started using the term common practice because I think there's always room for growth, and it's a continual improvement process, that we have to continually keep getting better at what we do. So that being said, I've done work here locally and nationally for companies like Oak Ridge National Lab, U.S. Army, a company up in Ohio called Reynolds & Reynolds. It's a software development company for automotive dealer management systems. I also, in my free time, I'm a worship leader. I like to keep an eye on the threat trends. I'm married, celebrating 10 years this year to my wife, Kristen. And we have 3 daughters that we love dearly. So, some of that threat trend analysis is really what precipitated this talk. And so I'm happy to share with you guys today a collection of knowledge from a lot of resources that are smattered across the internet, as well as some of my own analysis that I've done. So without further ado, let's move on. I want to just make mention, I made mention here just a minute ago about ISSA East Tennessee chapter. Here's some information for you guys. If you're wanting more info on that, check us out on Twitter or at our website, etnissa.org. And the reason that I have this up here is because one of the great benefits of the Information Systems Security Association is this little publication that's put on by members called the ISSA Journal. And it's a monthly publication. And in April, actually, the feature article was on Cryptolocker. And so one of the things that you guys can do is scan this completely benign and totally honest QR barcode right here if you like, and read this article for free. I promise that it's not a malicious QR code. You can come find me later and beat me up if it is. So these slides will be available, on SlideShare with the links, as well as I have a resource page that I've published on my blog that go along with these slides. So I really encourage you guys to check out the ISSA Journal, and this article is really, really good. He pretty much stole my entire talk and put it in a journal article. So before you have a chance to read that, I'm going to go ahead and finish the talk up. So last June, the FBI put out an advisory through IC3 about CryptoWall, and just stating that, CryptoWall and its variants have been used actively to target U.S. victims since April 2014, and the financial impact of victims goes well beyond the ransom fee itself, which is, typically $200 to $10,000. I've heard numbers as high as $25,000, depending on the organization and what the malware developers are able to determine from the infection, who they're dealing with, and then inflate those fees. And so, as we're considering the reasons for this particular type of malware, I think this is a really insightful advisory to kind of keep in mind. So how many folks here have, this is maybe your first time hearing about Cryptolocker. I really hope that's not the case. Anybody? Okay. Does anybody care to maybe tell us a little bit about things that they know about Cryptolocker? Share a few things. Anybody? No, you're gonna let me fly solo today. All right, so Cryptolocker is crypto malware. It's ransomware and encrypts your files, holds them for ransom, which is by nature extortion, an act of extortion. Initially released September 2013, targets all versions of Windows, encrypts files by file type. We'll get into a list a little bit later, but it's essentially everything useful. When the encryption action is complete, you're presented with a ransom note that may include heckling of various forms in the most recent versions, and demands a payment, from, in older versions, $200. Now on average is more around $500 to $900, depending on the value of Bitcoin or whatever currency that is being demanded, and then and that can range up quite high, as I had mentioned previously. You're given a timed period, a time window wherein you need to pay that ransom in order to be given your data back. If you don't pay the ransom, the malware threatens to delete your data for good. And most of these, different various versions of CryptoMalware are demanding payment by money pack or Bitcoin. I've even heard of some recent versions now asking for Amazon gift cards or iTunes gift cards. And some of these things, they seem so bizarre and off the wall, but it's basically anything that, these malware developers can use anonymously to make money, right? And we're going to get into a little bit more of the making money in a minute. Cryptolocker encrypts everything. Useful, essentially. Even now going after company intellectual property. In most recent versions, AutoCAD drawings, as well as other types of business-specific documents have been included in this. And here's a little bit of a consultant statement on, and I'll just read it to you here. This thing hit pretty much all the file extensions that are usable, from MP3s to Microsoft Word documents. About the only thing it didn't touch were system files and EXEs, encrypting almost everything else with 48-bit RSA keys that would take like a quadrillion years to decrypt. Once the infection happens, it can even spread from someone on a home PC using a VPN to access their work network. And for me, that's the most scary part. And interestingly enough, CryptoWall 4 and other more recent variants are now have now even increased their key length to a 4,000 bit key length. So these developers are continually making improvements, continually getting smarter. They know that we're trying to defend against these kinds of threats, and so the advances are continuing. And so one of the takeaways I'd like to have for you guys during this presentation is what are some of the more recent developments and how do we protect against some of those. So looking at the numbers for some of these, in 2014, CryptoLocker was infecting over 50,000 computers a month peak. The US is the #1 targeted country statistically. And in the US, over 336,000 computers have been recorded as being infected. And one of the things that's really interesting is how metadata can be used to determine what's happening with infections like this. And one of the things that is out there is Google search numbers, right? So search results for CryptoLocker alone are over 210,000 per month, and that's on the rise. And that's a really good indicator of how big of an issue this is for people. You don't just go out and, not very many people just go out and search for CryptoLocker on Google unless they're looking for an answer to some kind of problem. So, which brings us to another related issue, and that's malvertising. How many folks the term malvertising is new to you? It's okay. If you're not vulnerable enough to stick your hand up for some of these questions, let me just tell you that yesterday I made a bunch of changes to my presentation and then I closed it without saving. So there, now that we're all sharing openly. So malvertising is a malicious advertisement that's injected through an advertisement stream. And one of the things that you may be aware of but may not have occurred to you in light of how these threats are propagated is that many websites today don't control their advertising stream. Those ads are served, rendered through a third-party service, through an external service, and then displayed through an iframe or script of some sort on their website, and they really have next to no control over what is being displayed there. And that has become an excellent vector for infection, an excellent way to serve up our malicious software the developers have identified that and are using that. And so this has really become somewhat of an internet pandemic. I put on this slide, before I forgot to save my changes, the real cyber pandemic, because one of the other things I've been following recently is the FBI versus Apple case. So who's also watching FBI versus Apple and the things that are coming in the wake of that? And I just found it kind of comical that one of the things that we had heard was we need to unlock the iPhone because it may contain a cyber pathogen. So I had put on here, the real cyber pathogen, because it was found later that, even that the iPhone didn't really, in question, didn't really contain a cyber pathogen. So these types of things are, the severity of this threat has led to FBI advisory, has led to other things like Fortune 500 companies investing highly in protection against Cryptolocker. I find it interesting that 69% of Fortune 500 websites use external JavaScript to render portions of their websites. We talked about Melvertising and how JavaScript can play into that. 64% of them, of those sites running outdated web apps. I think, one of the apps that comes to mind, is WordPress. There's a Cold Fusion. There's a long list, of those types of things. But I feel like, we've got some big issues to handle in advising companies with this type of capital of how to implement just common practices, keeping those applications up to date and filtering external content. So I've done some case studies through of our customers at TechLinks. One of the things that we've seen is that we're still seeing among our customers 1 infection per month, and on average over the past year or more. Over 5 cases in 2015 alone. And healthcare comprised 46% of those, which may look as a disproportionately high number of infections, but of the customers that we serve, that's actually a representative number of even across every vertical. So it's not one particular vertical that's being affected most by this. It's every vertical, every industry is being affected equally. It just so happens that at TechLinks we have more healthcare customers than other customers. So if you're in healthcare, you're just as likely as any other industry, and vice versa, to be targeted for Cryptolocker. All right, so we talked about the motivation earlier. It's mainly financial. These developers are looking for money through Bitcoin, money pack. A single instance could make over $250,000 in a month within a corporation. CryptoWall has resulted in over $1 million paid out in ransoms. And they're after the information, they're after the money, but most of all, it's just been easy for these developers to continue doing this despite law enforcement action against these developers. So here's a little history about Cryptolocker. It's gone by many names. So we kind of started with just a plain Cryptolocker, moved on to the F family in 2014. We saw the Critrani variants, the Reviton variants, Crowdy, otherwise referred to as CryptoWall 3. Last fall we saw CryptoWall 4 come with a major change in the splash screen, change in functionality. And then last fall we also saw the first Linux variant come with Linux Encoder 1. So you know, the Linux Unix platforms are no longer safe from this. Some more recent trends that we've seen is ransomware using RDP to spread, Android ransomware communicating over XMPP, Tor switchers to help decentralize traffic and you know, obfuscate the origin of the attack and anonymize, protect the developer and the command and control network from discovery and isolation. We've seen browser, mobile, and Linux variants. And I think you know, the biggest thing is I have extortion on this slide, but I had to come up with a little bit more of a specific terminology to discuss this because, you know, ransom, you know, demanding a ransom is extortion, and so that's not really very specific. And so one of the trends that I expect us to see is what I'm calling leakware. And what I'm expecting for us to see in this in leakware is that if you choose, if you're infected and you choose not to pay the ransom, that your data will be leaked in a WikiLeaks kind of fashion, or similar to you know, threats that we've seen through big breaches like the Sony breach. You know, we're going to splatter you all over Pastebin if you don't pay whatever we demand from you. And a couple of my peers have pointed out that exfiltration is an issue. So, you know, well, what about exfiltration? And I think that that's a valid point. However, if you were not able to protect, defend against this threat, and you weren't able to remediate it before the encryption action was complete, I question highly your ability to limit port 80 or 443 exfiltration of this data. So does anybody have a comment on that? I will give you a t-shirt if you say something so that I can take a drink of water. Nothing. Okay. So CryptoWall 3, you know, encrypts files, displays a ransom or a lock screen. And here are some of, is a long list of signatures by various vendors talking about their particular signature for that, for CryptoWall 3. As you can see, you know, most vendors are doing something in this area. Some are doing more, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more later in the presentation. But there are some really more advanced than just an antivirus signature ways that some vendors are developing to try to combat this, which I think is great because we have to do something. As a matter of fact, several big firewall vendors teamed up last year to do a great deal of threat research around CryptoWall, and they came out with a report in Q4 called the CryptoWall report, threat report, and of that, they came out with some pretty staggering statistics, maybe even more staggering than what we've talked about so far. And among those are an estimated $325 million in damages, 839 or more command and control URLs, 5 second-tier IP addresses used for command and control, 49 campaign code identifiers, unique campaigns that were run, 406,000 or more attempted infections of version 3 alone, and over 4,000 unique samples. And then, after all that research, we saw version 4 come into the wild. And with that, we saw some interesting changes. Encrypting file names and the type, which was new because previously one of the remediation techniques was to identify the types of the files that had been encrypted to kind of tabulate what damage had been done. Now, even the extensions had been encrypted, which made it much more difficult to remediate the threat. And an HTML ransom note recouching the way that the threat had encrypted that information in a "you need to help your files" kind of message. It also included a generally taunting and arrogant kind of message. So congratulations, you've become part of a large community, CryptoWall. So not the kind of congratulations that I really want to receive on a Friday afternoon at 4 p.m. Linux Encoder 1, we know to be written in C using the Polar SSI library, requires admin privileges, runs as a daemon and deletes itself, starts by encrypting the home directory and then traverses the file system recursively, and is only looking at directories starting with these extensions, obviously going after people's hosted content, their server infrastructure, and only included a limited file extension list, which was, I kind of look at this as like a beta rollout. The developers, is very early on, they're going after low-hanging fruit and trying to hit people where it's going to hurt them the most. So I just want to make a quick pitch for my buddy Russ. He's talking this afternoon on PowerShell for Cyber Warriors. Who's planning on attending PowerShell for Cyber Warriors? No, it's actually got to be on your schedule, like to raise your hand. Okay? Okay, good, okay. And one of the things that Russ is going to talk about is a module that can be used in PowerShell to test distribution of CryptoMalware. And so you guys will want to check that out. I was talking with him a little bit earlier in the back, and I said, well, Russ, you might want to say a couple more words. So if you're at this talk and you show up there, Russ might have some goodies for you, something delicious information or something maybe even more. So how can you get this? The Cyber Threat Alliance report revealed that 67% of infections were the result of phishing attacks, and 30% were the result of exploit kits. So obviously we've got a lot more work to be done in the area of what?
User education.
User education. You should have got a shirt earlier because you raised your hand earlier. So there you go. User education, basics, right? I mean, we come back to the very first weakness that we've identified over and over again. You can't fix stupid, right? So we've got a lot more work to do in user education. and phishing awareness. And you know, I'll recant my statement a little bit by saying that these phishing campaigns are incredibly smart, almost indistinguishable from the genuine article, and it takes a keen eye to identify, you know, when this is being used. And so, if maybe you've been the victim of a phishing campaign that resulted in CryptoLocker, it's okay. Come see me later. I'll give you a hug. So here's a little kind of chart showing what the phishing email you know, kind of process or chain would look like. Sorry for you folks in the back that this is, you know, this is probably hard for you to see. I tried to make it bigger, but I couldn't. You know, the victim, you know, through vulnerable browser and redirection is, you know, presented with a malicious server, then redirected again to an Angler or other compromised server. They're going to get the exploit kit page, which is going to then check for virtual machine and security products. So, you know, in the most recent versions, the software is sandbox aware, right? So, anybody going to bypassing sandboxing later this afternoon? Okay, so also related. And then if the sandbox is detected, we're exiting to a JavaScript exception error. If not, then serving the exploits and malicious payloads leading to the compromise of the system, which is pretty smart. So these, you know, the developers are finding ways to keep their code from even being examined in a sandbox environment. Exploit kits. Here's kind of a list of some of the identified campaigns and their corresponding exploit kits. Additional, you know, in addition to Angler, Magnitude, Neutrino, and Rig, we've seen VIP and Fiesta as well. So earlier, I talked a little bit about malvertisement and how that kind of ties in here, and that is really, you know, what is feeding the drive-by download mechanism. And here's a little bit of a chart from Microsoft talking about drive-by downloads in detail. And you know, this is where the iframe or JavaScript that's hosting that malvertisement would become the mechanism within the drive-by download for that software to be served up or that script to be run. So this relates, you know, to the previous page where as kind of an additional layer of serving up this and then directing the user's browser toward that command and control network. I put this slide in because a lot of times when we're, you know, online, the best of us, you know, we can get in this mode of clicking through material, and that can very quickly lead to this drive-by download situation. You end up, you know, oh, that article looks interesting, but it's served up by a third party that is not completely trustworthy and doesn't really screen their content very well, and then all of a sudden you end up on a website you shouldn't end up on. And there's kind of a little bit of an additional piece of information in this meme that I'm going to get back to in a little bit. But here's the iframe teardown. JAJ Company Inc.com. may be hacked. Let's check it out. So we go and look at that, and we can see here the iframe to the Angler exploit kit that shows us that the site's still hacked, just like Google told us. Because of this, Melvertising is a silent killer. Doesn't really require any type of user interaction to propagate the malware. Just browsing to that website, viewing the ads, having JavaScript enabled on your critical domain controller that you don't have another one of causes it to become infected. And you're running as admin, domain admin, not using enhanced security controls. Nobody does that. Essentially, web browsing is now, a big issue as it relates to this. And one of the problems that's led to this is just our advertising economy, right? So it's a complex economy. Buying, selling of advertisements. Many websites are sponsored, by advertisement. We've known for a long time that Google's main business is advertisement, not search. And so anybody here from Google? I heard there's someone here from Google today. Yeah, we wish we were all raising our hands, right? And then, but one of the things that Google does do a good job of is screening advertisements, whereas other websites may not do that type of diligence. So what we really need is industry partners that work closely together to detect these kinds of threats and keep them out of our internet economy, keep them out of our web browsers. And so hopefully we can see some of that come as time goes on, but probably not. Yes?
I'm Robin Wild with Scripts Networks.
Okay.
And we do have a lot of third-party... We do have a lot of third-party advertising, and this is a big concern for us. Do you have any recommendations that we could all use to do a better job keeping bad malvertising off?
I don't, but I'll be happy to get back to you on that. Let's talk more about that.
Yeah.
So thank you for your comment. Yeah.
Sure.
So if I understand what you're saying correctly, the malvertising is actually being hosted through legitimate advertising companies. It's not like somebody's hacking the site and sending it off into someplace weird.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just they place an ad, they happen to stick the link in there to the exploit, and off you go.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. So of the 336,000 I made on my last campaign, I reinvest 20,000 in an advertising campaign that's malicious, and now all of a sudden I've served up an additional 1.5 million malicious ads. That's not. I mean, that's money well spent, right, for the developer. So this is as Robin pointed out, is something that we'd all like to do something about. It's a question of how we do that. And so it requires, an industry coming together and talking about that. So, and I will get back to you, Robin, on, so yeah. File system mods, Cryptolocker is saving itself with a random file name, which makes it hard to detect. Creating auto start entries in the system configuration. These work even in safe mode. Hijacking exe extensions to delete shadow volume copies. And the linchpin of the shadow volume copies is on your desktops. This is what allows you to do a system restore. So if you don't have your shadow volume copies available, you're basically going to get a message that says, oh, can't do a system restore. And how many people are backing up desktops with a third-party backup system where you can restore? Okay, very few, very few. Probably a good idea for your critical desktops if you have a desktop that's like gonna end business as you know it, then maybe a good idea. Your computer. All right, so for us techies, how it works, we download the encryption keys, encrypt the files, and then demand the ransom. Here's a PCAP of that action. You can see the proxies in work. As well as the Tor switchers being used to kind of redirect that traffic. We get our encryption keys and establish a connection through a domain generation algorithm. This is one of the things that's making it very difficult to block CryptoLocker through that most relied upon NSA top 15 information assurance mechanism, domain whitelisting or reputation filtering, like OpenDNS, maybe Checkpoint or other services that are out there. Is now not effective or as effective because of the domain generation algorithm component. The malware connects and downloads a public key to the Windows system configuration, and then the private key is saved to the command and control server. And this is, of course, the reason why we can't find the key we need to decrypt from the local system. It's just not there. Here's a list of file extensions that CryptoLocker is looking for. I know this is really hard to read, so you can check it out later. When it's done encrypting these files is when you're presented with the ransom note. So you may not even know the encryption is going on, aside from indicators like high CPU load, high memory utilization.
Hyperdisk activity.
Exactly, yeah. So resource monitoring, it then becomes an early indicator, as well as your network IDS. So as mentioned earlier, draw files are now a target, and interestingly enough, even as of this week, CryptoLocker is now going after map drives first. So there may not even be an indicator on the desktop of this happening. It's really those map drives, which says to me, we're going after corporate information even more aggressively than in previous versions. So detecting, preventing, and remediation. Quickly, I'm going to move through these because I'm running out of time. Most people, the first time they find out about this is when they get the screen. Some people are discovering this through their SIM. Products are out there with signatures talking that will help you detect the traffic initially. And then they're finding that their local files are inaccessible or their server files are inaccessible. And in the case of the map drive information being targeted first, that's really our first indication is, there's all these weird file extensions on my map drive on the server, and now I can't access any of that information. So staying mapped to network drives all the time is an additional vector that we open up for CryptoLocker to propagate through the enterprise. Here's some external threat policies that are helpful in discussing or in detecting the check-in via SIM. You can see the IP-address ES check-in, as well as the HTTP request on the unusual port, and then a signature that's been tailored to the CryptoWall, which they're calling a Trojan. Here's the screen. Nothing new here, not much new information on this slide. just to say, here's the ransom, an average amount. It's timed. The private key will be destroyed. And again, this is really the first indication a lot of people have that they've got an issue. Log management can be used to detect this. Monitoring correlation services are useful as far as things like high disk utilization, your memory and CPU load, and other things. So phone home is kind of hit or miss because, again, we're routing these things through a number of different mechanisms that make it much more difficult to detect. Local ransom note files are also an indicator. Here are some frequently left behind extensions and file names. These can be searched using scripts to detect an alert, and even shut down the system. But the developers have identified that this is one of the ways that we're detecting this, and so they're dropping these files at the end, which then decreases our time to react. Talked about the scanning using PowerShell script. File screen management with audit rules can be useful. And it's important to note that all these things work in combination to bring your detection time down. Some detections have gone over 5 days, or more. So how many people do backups more often than 5 days? Yeah, most people are doing backups more often than 5 days. So that means that if you do a backup every 2 days, you would have rolled encrypted files to your backups twice during that time period, at least.
Depends on the backup strategy that
Right.
you have.
Yeah.
You can archive one per month for a year, and you can go back
Exactly.
in time. You'll lose stuff, but at least you won't lose it all.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but rolling to backup is no bueno. So here we come back to this. User awareness training is key. Not running as local admin does provide some protection. User account controls doesn't really apply to your path app data. So this is where a software restriction policy is really important. Who's using software restriction policies in their business today? Highly recommend software restriction policy or app locker in its newer form. So check that out. It's worth your time, especially on terminal servers and Citrix servers. Yeah.
Yeah, from the phishing piece, I don't know if you're going to talk about this, but anybody ever use like Lee Baird's Discover scripts? Because those things they're really easy to run. You can run them every day, but you can see like recent domains that have been registered that may be similar to yours.
Cool.
Or whatever, but simple check.
Yeah, awesome. Lee Baird's Discover scripts.
Lee Baird, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. All right, so Microsoft is not recommending you pay the ransom. The FBI has kind of flip-flopped on this. Pay the ransom, don't pay the ransom, pay the ransom, don't pay the ransom. Paying the ransom is always a way to continue this industry, to feed this industry. So I'll leave it at that. Running antivirus and malware protection with a full scan, not just your quick scan mechanism. Preventing spam. Additional things to do. What we were saying. Common security practices. Run up-to-date software. Latest software updates. Understanding how this malware works. Turning on your firewall. Limiting user privileges. Obviously. Attending a talk like this helps raise all of our understanding of how this works, and so hopefully it's been helpful for you.
Aaron, how about
Yeah.
did you have ad blockers up there?
Yeah, ad blockers or pop-up blockers are also a really great way, to mitigate against the malvertising drive-by download, malicious iframe, component. As a matter of fact, on here, there's some tools that you can use. These are all in my, my resources page, which I'm going to show for you guys in just a minute. And, you know, one of those that I just want to kind of come back to is twofold. Well, really two things. OpenDNS or another web reputation filtering mechanism is key. And two, products that use application control as a part of antivirus are a big win because companies like Kaspersky and others are researching these threats, keeping a pulse on them, and then updating through a behavior signature system, behavior signature stream, malicious application signatures. So at runtime, watching the system, detecting these, and then also even providing a rollback feature for application actions in some cases. You know, obviously, professional remediation is key here. Restoring from incremental backup, we talked a little bit about that. Using utilities and regaining access to your files. I have a list of utilities I'm going to provide you guys with as a part of my resources that I've talked about. Retrieving keys online. These, you know, these networks are being taken down by law enforcement all the time. Keys are constantly being published, and so there is hope, even, you know, down the road, of recovering from an infection like this, even if there weren't incremental backups available, even if you didn't pay the ransom. For those desktops that aren't backed up, rebuilding from gold image, wipe the machine. It's not just Cryptolocker that we're talking about. Cryptolocker comes with other things like Blackshades, remote access tool, and other Trojan downloaders that can be very, very difficult to identify and remove. And you know, because of that, early reaction is really essential. In earlier versions, disconnecting from the network was shown to stop the encryption process. It's no longer the case. Really, a hard shutdown is what's needed. Pull that drive and mount it externally, and then attempt to decrypt and salvage what is possible in an isolated environment. Reimage and restore of files is the way to go here. So, as I mentioned earlier, save that what can't be decrypted to offline storage in case the keys are, you know, later published out. And I mentioned how law enforcement's taken down these networks on an ongoing basis. So, with that, questions?
Yeah, do you know how smart the algorithm of CryptoLocker is? It's like,
Do you know how smart the algorithm for Cryptolocker is? For example, could I do something like make a Samba share and do like a link to itself, and then it'll go after the Samba share, sort of a honeypot black hole,
Yeah.
and it'll just recurse itself to death and just trap it?
Yeah, so that has been shown to be an effective mechanism in slowing down the process. And, you know, at Freaknik last fall, I heard a really interesting talk called Analog Security. There's a book out about it, and the whole premise is security is time-based. And in an increasingly complex, virtualized, high-performance environment, we have now become so fast that we exceed our ability to react to that. And so what you're talking about is a way of slowing down the infection long enough, maybe long enough, to buy yourself some more time.
You're just
So
like
yes.
to notice, yeah.
Yeah, it's not yet smart enough to know that it's been given a honey directory or whatever you want to call it. So a micro honeypot of some sort, to the best of my knowledge.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Here's my resources. Again, clean QR codes. So you guys, I'm serious about that. The slides will be up on SlideShare. Yes.
Just one side, and I can't confirm this one because we didn't see it inside, but from one of my buddies. One of my buddies ran across one of their sites, and one of their clients ended up with one that it actually was already seeing the shares even though they weren't mapped.
Okay.
So it actually was running through, picking up the shares live on the network and hunting for them. And this client had made a mistake, and the person who got it had more privileges than he should have, so it ate up a whole bunch of stuff, but she didn't even have map shares to it. So the mapping's becoming less of a problem. It's learning how to go find its own.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing that. I'm going to be updating this, so you guys will want to check back every once in a while. Here's my contact information. And again, encourage you to link up with us at East Tennessee ISSA and share the wealth of information that's out there. So I'll leave this slide up for you guys that want to connect with the organization. So thanks for coming. I appreciate your attention, guys.